From winter to spring, summer to fall, there are many variety of sports to enjoy with each season. So how does the weather influence sports? In this first part, we'll take a general overview of the elements and their effect on sporting events. We all know summer is hot, but why is it so hot? Well, you probably heard on the news the feels like or real field temperature. This is not the actual air temperature, but instead a measurement that takes into account the relative humidity to indicate what's called the heat stress index. So, for example, an air temperature of 96 Fahrenheit with 50% relative humidity feels like 108 Fahrenheit to your human body, and you might feel like this melting butter. And even worse, 88 Fahrenheit with 100% relative humidity can feel like it's really 121 Fahrenheit. Wow, that's hot. For athletes, sometimes they will train in the new environment to acclimate to the heat, especially in college sports regulated by the National Collegiate Athletic Association or NCAA. The idea is to reduce the risk of heat stroke and hopefully improve performance. Another surprising fact is that temperatures affect the density of the air. So, in higher temperatures, the air is thinner, leading to changes in drag on game balls, or in cycling, less drag and faster cycling times. Just like the excessive heat conditions, very cold is also unfriendly to the human body, let alone the human body trying to compete in the sport. Your muscles get tighter, it's harder to breathe, frostbite and hypothermia are all potential risks. Something that might surprise you is that athletes in the cold are actually at greater risk for dehydration, since the air is drier in cold weather. That's why you might feel lung burn on those extra cold, dry days. The next weather element in our discussion is precipitation. You might be aware that some sports are canceled because of precipitation. Others can be canceled when the ground is merely damp due to risk for injury. The following sports are prone to these type of cancellations: auto racing like NASCAR or IndyCar, baseball, cricket, golf, and tennis. If there is an excessive amount of rain, sometimes the ground isn't able to absorb it because it's already saturated. This is called waterlogging, which can also cause cancellations. And of course, winter sports need a sufficient amount of the fluffy white stuff for the sport to take place, so if there isn't enough, they can be canceled, or even if there's too much snow, they can also be canceled. These sports are skiing, sledding, or snowboarding. The next weather element affecting sporting events is wind. A good gust of wind could be the difference between making that field goal and a miss. The obvious outdoor sports affected by this would be American football, baseball, softball, soccer, tennis, badminton, and golf. When playing a sport outside with a game ball, there are a few forces at work. One is gravity pulling the ball down, another is lift, hence the aerodynamic shape of certain sports game balls, and finally, friction in the form of air resistance or drag. The lift is provided by the player throwing the ball, whether that's the quarterback or pitcher. It's also helpful for players to practice in all types of wind situations to hone their ability to compensate for additional drag or additional lift. The further the ball is thrown in a game, the more likely it will be affected by this weather element. However, it's not all bad. Wind is also crucial for certain competitive sports, most notably being boat racing, towed water sports like water skiing, and board sports like surfing. No wind, no surfing. How sad would that be? Now, we mentioned thinner air because of temperature earlier, but what about thinner air because of, well, pressure or increasing altitude? The vertical structure of our atmosphere is that the air pressure decreases with height. So, what does this have to do with competitive sports? Well, similar to how my team, the Nittany Lions, struggled in the heat in Miami, if they had played a team in Denver, Colorado, they may have also struggled. Why? Because again, the Colorado team lives, trains, and plays regularly at 5,280 feet above sea level or 1 mile above sea level, whereas State College, PA sits at an altitude of a mere 1,154 feet. That difference may not seem like much, but consider if you were to climb to the top of Mount Everest, you'd be above 70% of the atmosphere because the atmosphere is thickest if you go down towards the bottom. Okay, so how do our athletes handle these changes in altitude? Well, there is something called altitude training. Major research into altitude training started after the 1968 Olympics, since they were held at 7,349 feet above sea level in Mexico City, Mexico. Several sprinting event records were broken, but the endurance type events suffered at the higher elevation. These are perfect examples of why altitude training is now so popular. This type of training is regularly practiced by some endurance athletes where they relocate to a higher altitude and train there for several weeks at a time. Usually these aren't considered high altitudes, but it gives the same effects. Other techniques include using an altitude simulation tent or room and or using mask-based hypoxiator systems which lower the oxygen but keep the pressure the same. A more scary technique, hypoventilation training. This reduces breathing frequency and is supposed to decrease the blood and muscle oxygenation. The idea behind all these procedures and training is to acclimate the body to the relative lack of oxygen in the new higher altitude environment. Some athletes even believe that living high and training low can increase their performance, or another regime is live high, train high, where the athlete lives and trains at a higher altitude, but research has mixed results from these regimes. Scientists and athletes continue to research both on the hypoxia side of the scale, little to no oxygen, to the other end of the scale with oxygen enrichment to determine its effects on training and performance. I have personally experienced this to some degree. I joined my sister on her orientation camping trip for college at Black Elk Peak, South Dakota, which is the highest peak in the state. Now we were both jet lagged, fresh off the plane, and suffering minor sinus infections when we went on this excursion. It was required for incoming freshmen. Needless to say, after spending the night in a tent, getting up early the next day to hike to 7,242 feet above sea level, we had just come from the eastern shore of Maryland where we lived at the elevation of a measly 43 feet above sea level. So as we began the hike, the sign at the beginning of the trail informs us that one, the difficulty level is high, which of course it is, and two, the trail is 6 miles long and it takes roughly 4 to 5 hours. I don't think any of the other students, the native South Dakotans, read the sign because they took off like that sign didn't exist. And needless to say, yours truly and her sister were on the struggle bus all the way to the top and back. You really don't know the effects of altitude on your body until you experience it for yourself. And by the way, the extreme conditions like Mount Everest, the thin, high altitude air can kill you if you don't bring the proper equipment. Finally, of note, visibility can affect sporting competitions. When you can't see the other players, let alone the ball, you've got problems. Most notably here, cricket matches will actually be canceled in heavy fog conditions. The umpire is responsible for calling poor lighting conditions, and it can get pretty controversial. Next time, we'll dive deeper into weather and American football.